Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here this morning on your holiday, on your summer break, if you're not teaching summer school or maybe you're an admin. But thank you so much for being here. Today, I'm going to talk about health and wellness through an equity lens. My name is Kimberly Ohara Borowski, and I am a 9th grade health teacher in Huntington Beach, California. My past, I've taught middle school and high school PE. And before that, I worked in the medical field in sports medicine. And I met my husband, who's also a teacher. And I feel like I made seriously the best choice. I feel really grateful for the life I have. And anyway, I would love to know who we have here today. So if you can share in the chat what your role in education is, maybe where you teach or what you teach, and maybe a superpower that you have or something that you wouldn't mind sharing with everyone, something that we could celebrate from this insane, crazy last year and a half. All right, so thank you. So who do we have here today? And as people are coming in, I made a Google Drive of different resources in this presentation. So if you like something, you want more context or content, you can go to the Spitlink link, or you can scan this. I'm also going to share it at the end of the presentation as well. All right. All right, and feel free to connect with me. I love learning new things, and yeah, I'm always growing and learning. So if you don't mind, if you don't mind sharing where you're from. Okay, cool. I was like, how come I'm not seeing anything in the chat? Welcome, Andrea and Jenny. Oh, Delaware, wow. Yeah, LA. I grew up in East LA. Canada, Anaheim. Woo. I live in Fullerton, Olga, so that's right down the street. Welcome, Deanna Morgan. Oh, Anaheim. Cool. Oklahoma. Wow. San Bernardino. All right. Oxnard. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Hey, Kristen. So good to see everyone here. A lot of Anaheim people. Yeah. I live in Fullerton, which is right down the street. All right. So I'm going to get started as people are still coming in, and I'm going to share this whole presentation Google Drive at the end. So don't feel like I'm not going to share it. Everything I share with you today, you can take it, use it as you want. So when Matt Bassett reached out to me earlier in the year, I was trying to think about what I wanted to talk about. And if there was one professional development that I attended at the Orange County Department of Education, it was Know My Name, Face and Story. And they talked about how our boys are fed into like the school to prison pipeline, especially our Black and brown boys. And it was so eye-opening. If you have not seen Tia Martinez speak, you can Google Tia Martinez talk about the school to prison pipeline, really eye-opening. And then there's just so many other professional developments and like events that has happened in the last few years that are has really impacted my emotional health, but as well as just like in the classroom teaching through COVID, it's been really hard. And so anyway, I was really happy this year that the CDC front and center claimed racism as a public health issue. I was like, yes, finally we have some backing so I can talk about it in the classroom. And just living through the pandemic and thinking about access and equity, that's kind of what I went with today. And then also last year with the physical fitness test being suspended, really has gotten me to think about like equity and access and inclusiveness, even more than ever. And so I've been doing a lot of reflection, and a lot of equity and social justice work is reflection. And I really love this quote, and I say this quote every single day, like, do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better. And I feel like I take this everywhere I go. So today I'm going to discuss some like vocab terms and concepts, reflecting on health and PE with an equity lens, and then some strategies that we can implement in the classroom, like what it looks like. So educational equity, this means that every child receives whatever they need to develop their full academic and social potential, and that each child is successful. And I am finishing up a book called Coaching Equity, and I highly recommend it. If you don't buy the book, I bought it on audio because I like to bike ride, I like to run, work out, and clean my house. So you can, do two things at once, listen to an educational book, as well as like do some other activity while listening. But anyway, if you have not checked out Elena Aguilar's Coaching for Equity, she has a phenomenal equity rubric that I'm going to share later. And then health equity has been at the forefront this year with the pandemic. Everyone has the opportunity to attain the highest level of health. So we have seen examples after example after example of health equity trying to get our most disadvantaged communities like vaccinated first. Health equity. If there's any current event, it's been the pandemic, and this word has definitely been at the forefront. The next term is health disparity, and I like to talk about this with my students, and I'm going to share like some failures of mine that I've done a terrible job at, like, telling the whole story behind data. But health disparity, these are preventable health differences between groups of people. And then social justice work in education, this is just the distribution of resources that's fair and equitable for all students, so they feel physically safe and psychologically safe and secure. And one last term, there's a lot of terms, and I kind of wrote them all down for you because I had to process them a lot, because there's just so many terms that we never, like in school, I never learned about social justice or equity and physical education or sports medicine. So there's a lot of things. I'm not a public health major, so I had to learn all these things on my own, and I feel as okay, can you hear me now? Let's see, let me go in the chat. So social determines health. If there's one thing, I feel like all people need to know this term, and so many people do not. Just go on Facebook and it will drive yourself crazy reading comments about, the pandemic and things like this. It will make your blood boil. But social determinants of health. These are the conditions and the environments where we are born, where we live and grow and age. And so many environmental factors affect, either positively impact our health or negatively. And I just threw a whole bunch of terms at you, and if you're like me, I'm a visual person, so I'm just going to share. I have this in the Google Drive that I made you all, but I feel like I have to see it. Hence why I became a physical educator in the first place. I like to do with my body. I'm a kinesthetic learner. So anyway, as health educators and physical educators, because I acknowledge that most of you here are physical educators, and a lot of you probably have to teach health in the classroom or encouraged to teach health education along with physical education. So as health educators, we can be the agents of change to advance health equity and social justice. We can develop critical inquiry We could develop skills and knowledge in our students. We also have the opportunity to explore systems of power, privilege, and racism. And have brave conversations. It's not easy. And then to discuss the social determinants of health and health disparities. So I'm going to give you more context. So in the health and PE world, I was trying to think, how can I relate like what I do in the health classroom and what I also did in the physical education classroom, and what's kind of at the forefront. So the first one is health data, and I'm going to tell you my failures here. So a lot of teachers and administrators use data to shape our curriculum and our instruction. But we also use data in class to share with students. For example, in physical education, I would share like more than half of children of color will get diabetes. Like I've shared data like that, but I would never share like the story behind the data. And that's where I failed as a teacher. And I'm still beating myself up about that. And so like, how do we share data in the classroom if you do in regards to like diabetes, heart disease, cardiovascular disease? For me in health, do we share data like LGBT data? Do we share data around like sexually transmitted infections and like teen pregnancy? So what I did is I never really explained like the story behind the data. And so, like I said in the past, I failed to explain like factors behind health disparities. So I'm going to give you more context in a second. And this left students confused. And I'm sure you've experienced this as a teacher, like a kid will call out something and you don't know how to respond to it. And in the past, kids have said, that's racist. And actually they are correct. And I did not know how to respond to it. And so we don't want to marginalize students or children. And so what do you do first? Like before you share data, it's good to have like vocabulary terms. And I linked like 1-minute animated videos put on by Blue Cross. And here is an example that gives you just like a visual of like structural racism. So here we go.
Structural racism. Structural racism is a system that gives white people advantages over Black, Indigenous, and people of color, like better access to education, wealth, and health care. It's what happens when society makes it normal for white people to have these advantages. It is the deepest and most common form of racism. All other kinds of racism stem from structural racism. Did you know white men live longer than Black and Indigenous men? That's because Black and Indigenous communities usually have less stable housing, poor access to health care, and stress that comes from experiencing racism every day. All of these factors exist because of structural racism.
So I have links to like 1-minute videos, and I feel like these are really easy to understand videos. Oh.
What is race and racism?
All right, sorry about that. So moving on. So another thing that I think is really important to discuss before you share data in the classroom is to really discuss factors behind like social determinants of health. So the environment where you are born, you live, age, and like how this can impact our health. So many people still have the narrative, and the pandemic definitely highlighted this. So many people think like, oh, well, people should just eat healthy and exercise, and like, why are people like overweight? They wouldn't have caught COVID in the first place. I've heard ignorant comments like that throughout the pandemic, which was very hurtful and harmful. And so teaching people about like environmental factors that impact our overall health is really important. And so sharing with your students, like what factors lead to health disparities when we look at data, diabetes data, when we look at cardiovascular disease data, when we look at STI data. I always say there's a story behind the data. So I like to start with stories. So you can learn from my mistakes in the past. Stories are better than numbers. Language and vocab is really important. And if you have not taken a look, if you're not sure where to start, we have the bigger picture. They use poetry and video, and sometimes they rap to tackle diabetes and to tackle health disparities. So I want to share this in the chat. If you have not seen this amazing nonprofit, there's a whole bunch of videos that you can share. Maybe, go through them and see which are relevant to the conversation in your phys ed class, but I highly recommend checking out these stories. And so I start off with the health justice story, and they talk about how we need to hold big corporations and our systems accountable for our overall health. And I use this story and then I bring it back to my students in Huntington Beach. My students, let's see. I tell my students, look around our neighborhood. There's more fast food joints. There's more vape and liquor stores than anywhere else in Huntington Beach. Why do you think that is? And it comes back to a long time ago, like redlining, like who could live where, based on your race. And so talking about like systemic racism and how like the environment impacts our overall health gives our kids like a better picture. And with these videos that you could use in physical education class, you can continue to explore like health justice using the skill of analyzing influences, exploring advertising and media messages that we get. You can have your students in physical education just go home and tally how many unhealthy food products they're advertised through just watching an hour of TV. They can tally it and you bring it back, and then you can have a discussion. We know based on data and research that Black and brown children have way higher, exposure to unhealthy foods and advertisements. And so I tell the kids that, and they start to get a little bit like, wow, like that's totally messed up. And I'm like, it is. And so like, doesn't it make you want to make healthier choices if they're available in regards to like, eating more fruits and veggies, like cooking your own meals versus driving through McDonald's? And so after you give kids background information on the social determinants of health and factors that lead to health disparities, then you can bring in like a lesson that I shared in the drive. We can look at data. And so looking at data, I always say data tells a story. And so we have a data point, rates of HIV, AIDS, sexually transmitted diseases, and teen pregnancy are higher in Black and Latinx population compared to whites. And so I tell the kids, I use Pear Deck, and I tell the kids with the drawing tool, they all get to participate, and it's anonymous if I were to show the whole class, and then it's not anonymous on my end. And they check mark what factors they think lead to this health disparity. And it really opens their eyes to like, oh yeah, that's why there's this data point. And so you can learn from my mistakes. Don't teach about health disparities or inequities unless you're teaching about like systemic racism, power and privilege. And then, let's see. I'm wondering, do you address BMI or obesity in health class or physical education class? Yeah. Does anyone in the chat, can you share, like, do you talk about obesity or BMI in class? So I have one yes. Yeah, so I'm seeing some yes, sometimes no. I don't, you're very conscious of fat phobia, which kind of this is why I want to bring this kind of to the forefront of our conversation today. So some history of BMI. Number one, it was a Flemish guy that was like super interested in learning about like the most ideal average European man. And he was a mathematician, statistician. He was not a scientist or exercise physiologist. And so it was never meant to measure, like be able to, to measure like fat. But unfortunately, it was adopted by the world in many contexts, and it could be really misleading because a lot of people still use BMI that they truly believe like this is like the one of the I guess indexes to measure body fatness and mortality rates, which we know that is not true. At least I learned that in school. So BMI has been widely used as like a risk factor for other health issues, but we know this is not a reliable metric. We know people hold fat in different areas of our body, and like visceral fat, like abdominal fat, is more risky than other fat in other places. And historically, it's been used by insurance companies to deny coverage for pre-existing conditions. And BMI was like one of the factors. And I was reading some data. I mean, so many Black women in the past have been denied coverage because they have higher BMI. And we know BMI in certain groups are different. So for example, when we look at the South Asian women, although they look healthy on the BMI chart, some women who have normal, or they would consider like normal body weight BMI, have cardiovascular issues, diabetes. So we know BMI is not a great measure for health factors, as well as hopefully we're not going to be assessing BMI anymore in our state. So I'm really happy about that. So I feel like there's still a lot of obesity narratives out there, especially in the healthcare, but a lot of people think it's like a personal failure and it strains our healthcare system. Like, why doesn't a person just eat better and exercise? They would be thinner, which we know there's so much behind, like our environmental factors, like the air we breathe. Do we have transportation to go to the farmer's market and pick up healthy fruits and vegetables? Do we even have time based on our job and income to even cook a healthy meal? Do we have access to healthy air and water? Can your children that you're teaching in the classroom go out and, kick a soccer ball or, exercise in their neighborhood? Is it safe? For many of my students, their neighborhood isn't particularly safe after dark. And so like we need to also have that equity lens, especially if we're sending kids home with like assignments or like workouts, things like that. I'm sure you thought about that with the pandemic, teaching through the pandemic. But if there's anything I want you to take home or take away, is to reflect on like messages you send about weight or obesity or BMI in your class. So just think about, if you do send messages, like what are they? And maybe you might need to rethink maybe how you talk about bodies. So I feel like there's a new narrative, which I'm optimistic, being that we paused the BMI assessment due to bullying and body shaming. Good job, California. And if you are not involved with CAPERD, and you're not involved with, you know, sharing your input in regards to assessment of, you know, California students for physical education, please make sure you, like, you know, get involved with the California Health and PE and Recreation Organization to make sure your voices are heard. Like, we want to hear from you to make sure that all, especially physical educators, are listened to and your voices are heard in regards to testing. I know when I tested BMI, it was always the most awful exam. Like, there's a kid that you knew their body, you know, didn't meet the standards, and it was just the most awful, like the body caliper and then like the body impedance, just like the most awful test to do as a physical educator. So I'm so glad we're getting rid of that. And then BMI, yeah, or I'm sorry, I was like reading a side comment. So like, all bodies are beautiful, valid, and worthy. And then also knowing there's a lot of, obesity is a complex issue, and again, it's not a personal failure. It really comes back to environmental factors that play a huge part in a person's role in whether you are healthy or not. So if you can put it in the chat, if you do talk about nutrition, what skills do you teach along with nutrition? If you teach nutrition, I'm sure with the pandemic, you're very limited in time in regards to teaching physical education and health education. I know for myself, I throughout like my entire curriculum, number one, I definitely thought teaching about nutrition didn't really have a place during the pandemic other than access to services. So if you don't mind sharing, if I don't know what you teach in regards to nutrition, maybe you keep it super basic, like learning about, you know, balancing your plate using myplate.gov. Maybe you just talk about like drinking water, like rethinking your drink instead of soda. Maybe maybe you talk about like encouraging students to eat more fruits and vegetables. Yeah, mindful eating, I love that. So Jessica's teaching about like healthy decision making based on the choices that you have. I like that. Ooh, this person does a nutrition journal, a sleep journal, movement, love it. Colorful eating, I love that. Ooh, I love, so not sitting down and watching TV with a meal, but like mindful eating, maybe sitting down with your family or friends instead of being on your devices. I love that. Yeah, eating a healthy breakfast and like documenting it. Okay, thanks so much. So I didn't feel like nutrition was relevant, especially through the pandemic. We had no idea where this was going in with the pandemic, and we're still recovering right now. And I had so many of my students' parents lose their jobs, and some students worried about housing. And I just did not feel talking about nutrition was equitable. And so I focused on services. So I made sure that my students were signed up for the free and reduced lunch if they needed it. And I'm like, sign up, no one's looking at you. Like, it's so important to eat. So signing them up. And if you're in high school like I am, signing up for the free and reduced lunch program, you can also get like AP and IB testing for free or reduced prices, as well as like helping with college applications. So if you're in like 7th or 8th grade, maybe you do have a conversation with students that you might know that would benefit from signing up. I feel like this is so important. And then helping my students find food banks. when I came back in person, physically, into the classroom, there was a few students that came hungry, and I sent them right to the nurse. We have like a little food bank. And so anyway, and connecting them with resources. So again, you never know what your kids are going through. You need to really, know them, know their name, face, and story. I focused on services like, do you need a counselor? Do you need to talk to the nurse? Do you need access to healthcare? And I would talk about it. Many of your parents lost their jobs, like you might not have health insurance. And so like, where can I see a doctor? Where can I get a COVID test? Where can I get vaccinated? And then I made my students and their families a Google map of services. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Eloise, for sharing. And so if you were to talk about nutrition in the chat, some of you shared, like you do share like myplate.gov. I like to share myplate.gov, but I like to compare and contrast it with Harvard's healthy eating plate. And the reason being is many of my students, they don't drink or eat a lot of dairy. And so when they look at myplate.gov, they're like, wow, I'm allergic to dairy. Like, how am I not healthy if I'm not eating dairy? So they're starting to feel really bad about themselves. But in our class in health, we can analyze influences. We can analyze influences of like lobbying and big corporations to get dairy on the myplate.gov. And so we can think about like who influences our health, and I can have the kids compare and contrast the two different, plates. So if you don't know about the Harvard healthy plate, definitely you can have kids look at both, and you can honor both. You can say, you know what, it's like everyone's different, and here's Harvard's healthy eating plate, and here's what the government's saying, and they're both great. And you can acknowledge there are a lot of people that are lactose intolerant, so cannot physically eat dairy. And so this might be more relevant to them. And then celebrating cultural diets. So for example, I used to have several dietitians come in and teach like 5 to 8 lessons, and they would do like a healthy cooking with my class, like a super easy recipe. My students loved eating and cooking like an easy recipe in class. We didn't have any sinks. We didn't have any obviously it's not COVID friendly, but they loved it. And the only downfall of the program, it was state and federally funded, was it was very like Americanized type food. And some of my students made comments like when we were making veggie quesadillas, they were making comments like they've never seen yellow cheese before. And I was like, that's right. I'm like, cheese isn't traditionally bright orange or yellow. And so just like tying in also cultural diets and really important. And so like after the dietitians came in, I would also supplement celebrating the diets from like all the children in our classes. So having like a cultural lens of like different diets, like vegetarian diets. So if there's one easy concept, if you're wondering what can I do in regards to nutrition, how can I implement this into the physical education classroom? Rethinking your drink. There's so many amazing ideas to run this campaign. Maybe you could do this for like Health Literacy Month in October, but rethinking your drink, super easy concept. Maybe you can, talk about this for a month, thinking about your drink and not, instead of Gatorade, turning to water. And then you can spice up your water. You can add a lemon. You can make it like a spa water, like cucumbers, strawberries, and make drinking water fun by simply just, you can talk about it. And there's all kinds of little different campaign ideas with this link in my slides. And if you have not seen the California Health Framework, I'm so proud that we were able to write a new framework that's relevant and aligns with our laws and ed codes to make it more up to date from 2008. And so there is a chapter on equity and access. It's wonderful. And they talk about physical education in regards to like health and nutrition. And I pulled this out because I'm like, yay. All right, movement, physical education. Like we're always trying to find ways to, number one, make our subject like visible. And so we know students who live in poverty have poor health and um, other outcomes in regards to like learning and being able to retain information. But what we could do is we can focus on actions that we can do in the classroom, like offering quality physical education and movement, connecting families to free and reduced lunch programs, connecting our families to services like medical care, services to mental health counseling, so important. And I push this all throughout the semester I have my kids. Like I tell them there's nothing wrong with talking to a counselor. And so what does social justice teaching look like? So I gave you some topics that I've thought really deeply about in regards to like equity and making sure it's like culturally relevant for my students. And so what does social justice teaching look like? So seeing students for who they are and when they come from, recognizing students, they're valuable contributors to your classroom, as opposed to, social, cultural, academic burdens. I feel like a lot of times we look at deficit data, like, oh, our school's failing in math and science and reading, and it's so like negative. But when we start from the skills and work upon the knowledge that our students do have, then we can have a more equitable, they can provide a more equitable education. And so know your students, where they come from and who they are. Know about their respective culture and community and their families. Like know their name, face, and story. I always say relationships first. So there's one story that I can't unsee and unlearn. I consider her a friend of mine. She's been speaking in my health class on sex trafficking and human trafficking for the last few years. And she is a survivor. And this person was sex trafficked from 12 years old to 17 years old in Orange County outside of Disneyland in Anaheim at the Irvine Suites. I drive by there all the time. I cannot unsee this. She went to school during the day just like any other kid and got good grades and worked the streets at night. Now, what bothers me is her education from 12 to 17, not one teacher, not one counselor, not the principal, not the security guard, not a police officer, a healthcare worker when she ended up in the hospital or arrested. Not one person ever asked her if she was okay. Unbelievable. Unbelievable to go that many years in school to not have anyone reach out to them. And so yeah, that story, it's like, I think about my friend's story and I'm like, every child, every day. And if you can tell yourself that, the kid that interrupts your class, like what's their story? The kid that, sits in the back with their hood on their phone, or like they're not talking to anyone. The kid that's disengaged, the kid that's always in the office. Like we need to connect with those kids on a personal, like human level, and connect them back. Relationships. And so what does social justice strategies look like in the classroom? Examining our beliefs, biases, and privileges, acknowledging that all of us, we bring unique experiences in the classrooms. We all have biases, we all have traumas, we have assumptions, we have so many different identities, experiences, and backgrounds that we bring into the classroom. So if you're planning, I know I just got an email from my principal talking about how, the desks still have to be still 3 feet apart, and you cannot have like round tables, which I'm really sad about for my health class. But just some guidance for planning. And it made me feel great that they're still requiring students to wear masks in the classroom. I've had a lot of anxiety around that. That makes me feel better going back into the classroom in September. But if you have not checked out Elena Aguilar's equity rubric, so she breaks it down into different domains, and it's meant to be used like a little bit at a time. It could be overwhelming, but if you use it a little bit at a time and just reflect on your practice, it is really good, and I highly recommend it. And if you have not checked out the Lieberman Bryan Inclusive Rating for Physical Education, this is more on teacher effort. So I want you to acknowledge, like, you go through, like, for example, I went through it, and I'm like, oh, I would have a pretty inclusive physical education class. But inclusiveness is also a feeling. Inclusiveness also includes feedback from all your students, as well as the parents and the community. So like, you can have like the best inclusive classroom that you think, but again, feedback from the community is really important. So I shared I shared the equity rubric. So someone wants to see it. I shared it in the chat, so you can peruse it on your own. I had so much to share with you. I know we're out of time. And if you have not, I have all this in the Google Drive, and so you can access all this information. I've thrown a lot at you. I apologize. I feel like there's so many amazing resources that I'm like, you have to know about these as a physical educator and a health educator. If you have not read the A through Z Social Justice in Physical Education Part 1 and 2 by Shape America, I have it in the Google Drive. Awesome. They go through A through Z, just reflecting on what we can do as educators in physical educators in the classroom to make sure it's equitable and just. So what can you do at the beginning of the year? This is easy. You can welcome and greet all your students by their name and their preferred pronouns. From day one, you can allow the students to create class expectations with you. Language matters, inclusive stories matter, but also language. One of my best friends posted this on their social media, and I kept coming back to this art equity infographic or image, and I am guilty of using all these terms, which are colonial and anti-Black, and so rethinking about our language is so important. And I think I use mastery probably the most, and so we can use alternatives like concept achievement, growth, excellence, comprehension, instead of mastery. And then what does a social justice classroom look like? Well, it's student-centered. Letting your students take control of their learning. Having a voice and choice in what they want to learn, what assessment they want, when they take the assessment. Not all of us learn at the same pace. And so thinking about giving kids choice is really important. And then when you call on students, is it random? And do you validate, even if they give you maybe the wrong answer, do you validate, thank you so much for sharing your voice? And then, offering thank you for sharing your perspective, and not embarrassing them if they don't have the right answer. In health class, we did a lot of computer work this year because of pandemic, and we are on Zoom all year. And so I really like the tech tool Pear Deck. And so when I would have every kid participating, and you can see the responses and share all the responses anonymously on your screen. But for you know what students, you can assess them by their answers on the teacher's side. So I really like Pear Deck. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. And then I encourage your students to question everything. I tell my students, I work with the Gender Sexuality Alliance Club at my school because I want to know like my students' stories. I want to provide the best education when I'm, delivering sex ed. I want to make sure it's inclusive. I want to make sure it's culturally relevant to my students. And I ask for honest feedback. I'm like, what do you think? Am I missing anything? Call me out. If there's something that I said that maybe you think is incorrect, please let me know. So in conclusion, I think questioning, reflecting with an equity lens, every lesson you do, every image and story that you share in your class should be inclusive and culturally relevant to your students. And being reflective on your biases and just knowing that what I'm sharing today might be different a year from now, but engaging in equity and social justice work, it's evolving practice. And like, once you know, like I can't unknow and unlearn things. Like once you know, like you can always do better. And so equity, it's just not a slogan, it's the way it should transform the way we educate kids. And if you have not checked out the health education website, I'm going to share it with you. I worked on the health education framework committee, like to help like vision this website. So I remember when Christopher Pepper bought the domain to this website. Anyway, for all you physical educators out there, because I know a majority of you are, and some of you are asked to teach health. What I love about this website, they break it down by grade span. And then we also have, let me just check, click on kindergarten through third. So we have all like the different content areas, but in health education, we really work on building skills because content changes, skills usually stay the same. And so they teach you how to teach the skill, and then you can incorporate content like nutrition or, for example, you can, with nutrition, you can analyze influences of the media and how that can impact our decision-making around healthy choices. So anyway, please definitely check that out. And what else? I have a few more things. If you're looking for some good reading this summer, I highly recommend My Grandmother's Hands. They talk about racialized trauma. This is very eye-opening for me. I know that I suffer from racialized trauma, but they talk about how all people suffer from racialized trauma and how it's neurological, like in our nervous system. It's phenomenal. And I really enjoyed listening to Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria. They talk about racial identity. They talk about equity and social justice issues. And if you have not checked out The Deepest Well, this is from our California Surgeon General, our first California Surgeon General, Nadine Burke-Harris. And anyway, I think I'm out of time. I just got a text, but I hope you can check some of these resources out because they're pretty amazing. And Teaching for Tolerance rebranded, and now it is Learning for Justice, which I think is pretty amazing. And if you have any questions, if you scan, I'm going to put my Google Drive in the chat here. Feel free to like pick through my resources, email me. Yeah, I'm always learning. There's so much that I have to learn and grow, but I acknowledge that you got to start somewhere. So I really appreciate everyone like tuning in. And yeah, there's a lot I threw out there, but hopefully you can maybe take one thing away today and reflect in your curriculum or instruction.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Round of applause.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, EPW, for having me. And yeah, there's just so much to think about. This is the hardest presentation I've ever put together, just because there's just so much emotion and on so many levels. Like this year has been so draining. um, I commend all of you to being here and learning after this insane year. I mean, to show up and learn during the summer. I mean, I love doing this stuff. My husband thinks I'm sometimes a little crazy because every day I'm like, oh, I'm tune into this health equity webinar. He's like, again? And I'm like, yes, again. So anyway, I just love learning. So please share if there's anything. Yeah, reach out to me, connect with me. Yeah.
Just like pause and take in how excellent that was. Just like pause and sit with that, because it was just like, yeah, you're like fast forwarding through all the stuff that you did, but like let's acknowledge what you just did was awesome, and thank you so much for it.
Thank you so much. That, like I said, it was like the hardest presentation to put together because I'm like, there's so much, and it's
You
like
forgot to pause. You forgot to pause.
Yeah.
Say, yes, I did
it. And I do want to thank you for your generosity of sharing your experience and your resources and all that emotion. That was fabulous.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, if you guys have any other like further questions, or I mean, you have my email, or you can connect with me on Twitter. Please share things with me. I'm like I said, I eat it all up and I take it all in and I question it, I reflect upon it, and constantly learning. Yeah. Thank you so much for the kind words.
Anytime. This was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And feel free to like share out my presentation, Jessica, Kayla. I don't know if you're going to put out like on the website for all the participants in case someone didn't get my presentation.
Yes, so everything you put into the chat has been put into the resource document that will get emailed out to everyone who's registered for the workshop. And it will be going out at the end of the workshop, because it will not just have Kim's resources, it will have everyone's from all of the presentations that we're providing. And you can always go back if there's something really good in there, because that was a lot. This is when I'm going back onto YouTube, because it will be posted to YouTube later. We're gonna edit it, like put on the buffers on each end, put it up onto YouTube. So you will have the chance to go back and look at it again. Yeah, because that was a lot to take in. I'm sitting there like trying to write notes. I was like, wait, it's gonna be on YouTube later. I don't have to frantically write. I'm good.
Yeah, there's so much, but yeah, I think as a physical educator, I mean, I've made so many mistakes, like sharing the data part, and then I never felt comfortable assessing BMI ever. I would like wake up and be like, oh, today's the day. Everyone walks in with their, sports bra and underwear, take, the body fat calibers on these poor children that already, are like embarrassed, a lot of them. I mean, I would be embarrassed myself. Yeah, so I'm so glad we're rethinking our assessment at the state level. Yay, California.
Yeah, it took long enough.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jessica and Kayla and everyone, for being here. And if you all have any questions, I might not have all the answers, but I do have some resources.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim.
So much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Very good.
Bye.
Thank you for attending the 48th Annual Elementary Physical Education Workshop. We're glad you were here.
Please follow us on our social media platforms. EPEW can be found on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
Please check out our website for links to more great sessions. Just go to epew-cp.weebly.com and click on the virtual EPEW 2021 tab at the top and scroll down.
EPEW 2021 Educators Assemble would not be possible without the support and dedication from the amazing EPW committee. The committee has been hard at work for months preparing for this workshop. Thank you to Linda McGee, Barbara Groton, Scott Wilson, Stephanie Sandino, Julie Miller, Jessica Monlux, Kayla Ailman, Shelby Lozano, Andrea Chavez, Scott Townsend, and Cindy Chase.
Thank you for attending EPEW, where our motto is, come to learn, leave as family.